Guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between, and at the end of the video, we talk about the viewer's pick of the week. So in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured on the episode. But let's get started. This week I had a pretty average size haul with 9 comics. We have a couple of issue 1s out as well. Night Terrors is continuing, so let's see what you guys should be picking up. Number 9 for me is actually one of those number 1s, which is Hawkgirl issue 1. And honestly, I was looking forward to this book because I love the idea of DC Comics exploring characters that normally do not get ongoing series, and if they have, it's been like 15 to 20 years. And Hawkgirl, it's been a really long time since she's had her own ongoing series, but I feel like this was very much dedicated to people who already really like Kendra as a character or been kind of following her in other titles, and I felt like this wasn't really a great jumping on point for Hawkgirl, and I feel like a book like this, again, maybe a character not everyone knows, needs to really sink their teeth into the character and pretend like they've never read them before. Like, why should we like them as a character? There is another character introduced, a new person. I forget their name, but I believe they were introduced in the YA graphic novels. Now they're being brought into the DC universe, and that maybe is a draw to people, but overall there wasn't really anything here, again, for me as someone who's not the biggest Hawkgirl fan, to sink their teeth into. So I was a bit disappointed with this one. So giving that 2 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, a book I was actually really looking forward to, and that is Big Game, issue 1. And this issue is a crossover of all Mark Millar's books, and I have to say, I've read a good chunk of his stories. I read, obviously, Kick-Ass. Let me actually look at everything that's on here. I read Kick-Ass, I read some in Nightclub, I read some in Kingsman, read some in Magic Order, read all of Huck, and read some of the Ambassadors. So literally I've read most of these books, besides Wanted, which is like the one that they're really promoting in the back here, of like, oh, you know, Wanted is returning. And I also read Jupiter's Legacy, which surprisingly was not in this, I guess because of the show being canceled. But, you know, point being is that I've read a lot of Mark Millar's stuff, but I feel like with this book, you've had to read every single issue of every book he's ever written, because it really is a continuation of the end of those stories, and I feel like there wasn't much of an entryway because of that. And honestly, it felt very overstuffed. The coloring felt very dark, so even, you know, moments I was really excited for, like the Kick-Ass moment where you're like, oh my god, what is Dave up to? Like, I want to see what his life's like. It was hard to see, it was hard to really jump into. So overall, I like the idea of this comic, and I think if you're a super Mark Millar fan, this is gonna be wonderful for you. But if you're a casual fan or only read a handful, and God forbid you've never read any of his stories, I don't know if this book is really for you. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7, which is Spider-Gwen Shadow Clones issue 5. You know, this is what I usually state with a lot of these female-driven miniseries from Marvel. I wish that there were more ongoing books for them, especially their bigger characters like Spider-Gwen, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel's returning and she's getting a miniseries. Like, they're shaking up her whole entire character to make her an X-Men or at least a mutant, and she only gets a miniseries. The actress from the show is co-writing that book, and it is not enough to give her an ongoing book. And I think Spider-Gwen in particular has had a hard time with just being a miniseries. There's not much of a story you could tell. You know, you have like the kind of one and dones. It has to do with her clones. You know, she learns a lesson and then she's all happy in the end, but it doesn't really progress her character that much. Unlike, you know, some of the other miniseries I think that are a bit stronger, like Silk, where it really continues from those ongoing books, and then Hellcat, which I really feel like they progressed her character, or at least been very introverted with her character to feel like, okay, this is how you could use a miniseries. And I, again, just think it's a shame that we don't get ongoing books with them, but then also when you do have a miniseries, making it very one and done. And that's kind of what I felt here. It was a very one and done finale, and honestly kind of forgettable. And the artwork is just okay for the book, and I just wish there was something bigger for Spider-Gwen and such a big character. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 7. Moving on to number 6, which is Batman Superman World's Finest, issue 17. What's interesting about World's Finest is that they really go for the long haul. The whole first arc lasted I think 10 issues. And if you really like the arc, you're gonna love where it's going. But then if you don't really like the arc, it doesn't really end. And the first arc I really loved. I loved the whole entire sidekick story that was going on with Superman, and it seems like they're going to be continuing that. But this side of the story, the I always forget his name, the Element character, that's not something. Amazo's in this as well. It's just not something I'm interested in, and it was a very actiony issue. It was like good action, but there wasn't anything I wanted to sink my teeth in and be like, oh, that's really cool. That's a cool twist on this. And I think it really just has to do with how invested you are with the arc. And I'm glad this was one of the shorter arcs, even though it's still like 6 issues, I think. So giving that 2.5 stars. Artwork is obviously wonderful with Dan Mora. And if you're looking for an action issue, that's this. But I do think that the next arc looks a little bit more promising. All right, moving on to number 5, which is Night Terror's Nightwing issue 1. I've been saying this in every video so far. I'm not really loving Night Terrors. There's very select few books that I've been enjoying from them, and I'm curious to see what I'm going to actually end up picking up next month with the continuation. It reminds me a lot of Future State when they did that event, and honestly, Future State didn't really do much. Even the characters they tried introducing, they kind of abandoned. I think Wonder Girl is a great example of that. I really like that character a lot, and you don't really see her very often. And this kind of feels the same. It just feels like a stall, honestly, and it doesn't really connect to the actual series that's going on. And Nightwing's also a really good example of that, where it's very one and done. I do think this is one of the better ones, not the best one. I think there's only 2 I've liked so far with Night Terrors. One of them is in this pile, and I'll talk about it. And then last week it was The Flash, because they felt like it was attacking their soul a little bit. It felt like it was a little bit more introspective, and that's how you have to do these dreams. And I feel like Nightwing tried to do that, but it was really treading old water. It's the idea of like, oh my god, Batman's dead in this dream? Like, I'm his son. What does that mean for me and the mantle? What's going on with Barbara? And obviously it's all stated in Arkham Asylum, which we've seen a billion times with this character and the Bat family in general, and it just didn't really feel outside the box for me. But we do have Daniele who does the artwork here. It's a really visually strong book, and I don't even think it's, again, there's some ideas and little trinkets or little nuggets I like with it. Again, I enjoyed the Barbara cliffhanger. I want to kind of see where it goes, but I just don't know if it makes it special. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to the book I was alluding to, number 4 is actually Night Terror's Superman issue 1. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. Obviously, this also has the positivity that the writer that is writing the current Superman book also wrote this. So Joshua Williamson also is running this event, so it really worked out in that regard. And the artwork is really great. It really reminded me of Chris Samnee's art style. I actually thought it was him for the longest time, and it ended up being a different artist. But this one has to do with Superman, and yeah, we have seen this idea before where Superman has to tackle the idea that he is going to live a lot longer than his loved ones. And how about if the world doesn't need Superman? But the way it was written, it felt very introspective. It felt new. It felt like there was a little bit of a different angle to it. And I just liked the pacing of the book. I just thought it was this is how you should do a Night Terrors book. A good kind of one and done that is a bit more of a character piece. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 4. Moving on to number 3. Now, this is actually the title of the book. Should you be putting Blade on your pull list? And if it's this high, yeah, you should be putting Blade on your pull list. I was really excited for this book, not because I'm a Blade fan. I know really next to nothing about Blade. I know that he's like a half vampire and he's a vampire hunter. And I read the previous mini-series with his daughter. That's kind of all I got for you on Blade. That's it. So, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about Hawkgirl, where Hawkgirl was really introduced as a story of like, okay, you need to know Hawkgirl, you need to already love her to kind of enjoy that story. This, you don't need to know anything about Blade, and you could really sink your teeth into this, and that is definitely pun intended. And then another reason why I want to pick it up is Elena's artwork, who worked on Black Widow, which I thought was phenomenal. It's just such a great book with Kelly Thompson's writing, and again, that art style, and it works so well here. It feels like a movie. It feels like almost an episode of Buffy, but for like 2023, where we get to see this character who's like this chosen one, this girl who doesn't know what's happening to her, and Blade's on the case to try to save her. And then we have the twist of she's actually taken over by this like ancient character who wants to destroy the world, and Blade kind of helped her to not be destroyed. So now, is it his fault? Is it not? There's a lot of good vampire action in it, a lot of good blood, a lot of good horror, and overall, I just thought it was a really solid book. I'm curious to see where it's going to end up going, and I definitely think it's worth putting on your pull list from a writing standpoint to an art standpoint as well. So that is number 3 for me. And moving on to number 2, a book I was also really pleasantly surprised by, and that is Tales of Titan Starfire, issue 1. Starfire is a character that, I know a gist about, but I'm not like a super Starfire fan. And I feel like this was really written in a way where if you're a super fan, you will say this is a 5-star book, and rightfully so. They really do celebrate the character very well. But if you're not a Starfire fan, I think it gives you, or don't know as much about her, it gives you enough information to kind of just sink your teeth, be like, oh, what is she up to? And this also felt like a good job of like continuing her story. It's still connected to the current events of DC Comics without saying like, do you want to know what happened to Starfire? You want to know about her planet? Want to know about her sister? It's continuing her story and progressing her while still being introverted and talking about, why her strength and in her words, her weaknesses is her feelings and how she feels things very strongly. And that's really the whole theme of the issue as she skates along and tries to figure out her place in this world. And it's a really well done one shot, and it makes me very excited to see where these other issues are going to go and the other characters they feature. The artwork was really well done for this too, fit the character really well. It's very bright, very cheery, and I enjoyed this book a lot. And I'm curious, like I said, to see where it goes. And it's interesting to have the very few DC Comics that aren't Night Terrors related, because it does feel like a breath of fresh air, honestly. So giving that 4 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to number 1, which is Radiant Black, issue 25. I was really excited for this issue, and it doesn't disappoint, because obviously you're getting the answer of, okay, who's going to be the next Radiant Black? And they do such a wonderful job at building that, because the thing that really made this my number 1 pick of the week was not the idea of, spoiler alert, Marshall becoming Radiant Black. It was the idea of their friendship. It's this build-up and this nuanced, organic storytelling where we get to see why Nathan's even friends with Marshall and how they kind of separated a little bit in high school and what made Nathan become his friend and how that dictates their friendship currently and their decision to see who's going to be Radiant Black. And it made me feel, I actually voted for Nathan as the Radiant Black because I was like, oh, I really like him. I relate to him. I like the writing stuff. And then after this issue, I was like, oh man, I actually hope it's Marshall. I wish I had this story before so I could have voted that way. But honestly, it made me like care and happy that Marshall ended up becoming Radiant Black. And then obviously you're kind of building this mythology and this bigger story, this war and what the Radiants are all about. And the artwork was really solid for this one as well. And it really goes down to why Radiant Black really works. Again, it's building its mythology, but at the heart, it's really a character story where you can relate to it. It feels very modern and it feels, like I said, very relatable, Peter Parker-ish in that way. So overall, giving that 4.5 stars. That is my pick of the week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno. Let me know in the comments below what your pick of the week was. And the viewer's pick of the week from last week was Fish Flies. And here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I'll see you guys in the next one.